Embarking on the journey of business ownership transfer can be complicated and emotional, particularly with family entwined. Join me, Vincent Mastrovito, owner of Prometheus Partners, in Finishing Touches, the podcast that genuinely understands your challenges and aims to equip you with invaluable tips for a smooth business succession. By the end of each episode, you'll feel more confident and ready to guide your business into the next phase. Enjoy the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Finishing Touches, the show where we delve into the world of business transitions and uncover the secrets to successful mergers and acquisitions. Today, we're going to have a very special guest with us today. Michelle Kime is an M&A expert with over 4 years of corporate and PE and M&A experience. Michelle is the owner of Cross Key Partners, a company dedicated to making business transitions seamless. But that's not all. Before venturing into the M&A market, Michelle spent over a decade running supply chains for aerospace and defense manufacturers. She holds an MBA from the prestigious University of Chicago Booth and is a wife and mother of 2 wonderful children. And here's a fun fact for you. Michelle is also an Irish dancer. That's going to be talked about today. That is for sure, Michelle. Competing all across North America in her spare time, if she has any, I'm going to suspect. Today, we'll be exploring some of the key discussion points with Michelle. First up, we'll uncover how CK supports business owners on their path to selling their business, and what exactly is the difference between a buyer's rep and a seller's rep. Then dig into some timing of selling a business and discuss how soon before sale should you start talking about potential buyers. And then lastly, we'll address the ever important question of finding the right buyer and transition plan for your business and how to make that crucial choice. So that was certainly a whole lot and a mouthful for everybody to handle. So get ready for some informative and entertaining discussions with Michelle on mergers and acquisitions with our expert. Welcome to Finishing Touches. Michelle, great to have you here. Wonderful to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for the very warm introduction, Vince. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to get started. I love M&A. I love talking about M&A. And I do love talking about Irish dancing. So be careful what you wish for.
Well, let's spend a minute or so and help our listeners understand Irish dancing, because I think that is just fascinating, and just kind of help them understand it's great to be well-rounded as a person, right? And certainly you're not going to catch Vince out there doing Irish dancing at this point. It would probably be more comical than anything. But tell us a little bit, how'd you get started? And tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, my husband actually took me to a river dance show, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. And then we went to an Irish festival, and they had little kids, I was like 28 years old. They had these little kids that were Irish dancing, and the owner of the dance school got up and said, oh, by the way, we have adult classes. So I just thought, you know what, I'd like to try that just to see if I can do it. And I instantly fell in love with it. And I've been doing it kind of ever since, with the exception of when I was pregnant with my youngest. And now I'm at the adult championship level. So I started as a beginner and worked my way up, and I just love it. And I would do it all day if I could, and if my body
awesome. Yeah, and I'm sure it's a fantastic workout too. So
it is, yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. That is great. It's always nice to find out what drives people other than just work, right? It's just like, hey, there's something else out there that's kind of unique, and that certainly you don't hear that a whole lot. But I'm awesome that you enjoy it, and dancing is always a great thing and keeps everybody fit, and it's also good for a lot of different things. So you work primarily on the buy side of the M&A. Would that be a correct assessment?
Yeah, 100% exclusively buy side.
Okay. So I know you and I had this conversation a couple of months ago, which kind of threw me off a little bit about, well, what's the real difference? Because you always hear, well, I'm on the buy side or the sell side. So can you help our listeners have a really good understanding of what is the difference between, let's just say, what you do on the buy side and what they may normally see as a business broker or an M&A person would probably be on the sell side?
Yeah, I can certainly take a crack at that. A seller's representative, like you mentioned, is going to be a broker or an investment banker. who's going to exclusively represent you as a seller, and they're going to go out into the market. They're going to try and find a buyer for you. And their goal is going to be to get the highest purchase price for your business that they possibly can. And they're going to take you through the entire process from start to finish, from preparing your business, marketing your business, and then going through that diligence process with you. What I do is I actually have relationships with hundreds of buyers. And then I go out and I search for businesses that align with those specific needs of those buyers, whether that's a strategic need or a more opportunistic need. And then once I find those relationships, I think of myself as a matchmaker. And I talk to a business owner about their goals and what they want to do post-transition, because some owners want to exit completely. Others are looking for a growth partner or, looking for something in between. And then I go out to all the buyers that are in my network, and I sift through those to find a buyer who's going to fit the culture and the goals that the business owner has, and who is also interested in acquiring a business in the business's space. So that's kind of how we differentiate between a seller's rep and a buyer's rep.
Okay. And then I assume then that the buyer is the one that is paying you for your skill set and research and all the other stuff that goes along with that, right?
Very good question. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes. So the buyer pays all of my fees. And I am a little bit unique in that I work on a contingency basis. So I don't get paid anything until a business owner and a buyer close a deal. And then all of those fees are paid by the buyer. And that's an unusual business model. Typically, you see buyers reps paid on a retainer basis by the buyers in their network. And they go out and they search for deals to supply the buyer on that, somewhere between $3,000 and $7,000 a month. I don't do that. And the reason for that is I really care about the sellers that come into my network. And I want to make sure that I match them with not just a buyer who's going to buy their business, but the right buyer for them. So I prefer to maintain all of the relationships that I find out in the market, so that I can make sure that they are connected appropriately to a buyer who's not only going to treat them with this dignity and respect and value their business fairly, but who's going to be a good partner for the long term.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. Now, let's talk a little bit about, do you have a particular niche that you work with, since you have a background in supply chain, aerospace, manufacturing? Do you stay within those areas for the most part? I know you could probably go anywhere, but is that kind of where you like to focus your attention?
Being based in West Michigan, I kind of naturally fall into having a lot of manufacturing in my pipeline. But I don't stick with just those industries. I have a lot of experience from an M&A perspective, beyond manufacturing, beyond aerospace and defense, in distribution and logistics, ABA or autism clinics, CPAs. I do a lot of work with like recurring revenue businesses as well. And because we spend so much time in these spaces, it's really beneficial for the business owners who we connect with, because we know the buyers in the space. We know the transition strategies that are available and how businesses are valued. We're always here to talk with business owners about, is this a fair valuation? Are they treating us with respect? And this obviously helps a buyer or helps a seller find a buyer faster and be comfortable that it's the right buyer for them. But no, we will really work in just about any industry, as long as we are able to wrap our arms around that space so that we can have an intelligent conversation about a business.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. So what's a typical time frame or runway that a seller should start taking a look at potential buyers?
Now.
Okay, everybody that listens to this podcast, you have heard it from Michelle. Right now is the time to reach out to her and talk, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So a lot of my relationships, they extend for years. I have business owners that I'm working with who I've been talking to for years. So there's really never a time when it's too early. And there's a few benefits to starting the conversation early. One is it can reduce the need that you have to invest in an investment banker when you do go to sell your business because you already have relationships in the market. Another is that you've built trust in the relationship with your prospective buyer, which means that the due diligence process is going to run more smoothly. It's going to be faster, and that trust is going to allow you to be more open in your communications, and vice versa, them with you. So even if you don't plan on selling for 5 years, 10 years from now, there's no reason why you can't be having those conversations today. The right buyer for you might have a very specific criteria of a business that they won't invest in, right? Maybe it's customer concentration. And maybe you have customer concentration, and you can work between now and the time that you're ready to sell in diluting that concentration so that you really truly are an attractive target for the right buyer when the time does come.
Yeah, that would kind of parlay into the next question I had, which is really transition or exit planning, right? Which is a lot what we do, but it's like, if you have some of that set up, you've kind of done some of the planning and let's just call it quasi due diligence to kind of walk through and prepare that company to be ready to be transferred to a new business owner, even though it may not be there. You kind of know what your blind spots and weaknesses are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some very specific company characteristics that across the board private equity firms will not invest in, right? And customer concentration is one of those things.
Yep.
And these are things that aren't typically fixed overnight, right? So you can't look at your business and say, I want to sell in 12 months. Here are the 3 major characteristics about my business that I need to change between now and then. So the earlier that you start with that transition planning and what kind of a buyer you're looking for, and better yet, how can you get integrated with them before the sale, whether that's from a strategic partnership with a portfolio company that they already own or, something to that extent. Like what can you do to make that transition, not only make your business more attractive and therefore worth more to the buyer from a purchase price standpoint, but make the overall integration smoother.
Yeah. What do you see in kind of your environment as some of the challenges or pitfalls that business owners may encounter as they go through the process? I know you've mentioned one. Certainly, customer concentration is a big one. It could take forever, and sometimes it just can't be done. So you have to change where you're going. But what are some of the other areas that maybe have some pitfalls in it that they may not be aware of?
So there's about 1,000 pitfalls throughout making a deal, unfortunately. Some of these items, one that comes to top of mind is buyers retrading. So what that means is the buyer has estimated that they're willing to pay X amount of dollars for your business. But then throughout due diligence, they discover something that wasn't disclosed to them prior to them offering that amount of money. So they change either the purchase price or the structure around that purchase price. This is a huge pitfall and oftentimes does cause deals to fall apart. And some things that sellers don't often know is that there's a very sophisticated due diligence process. I mean, we talk about diligence, but what does that really mean? It doesn't just mean that the buyer is going to comb through your P&L. It often means that the buyer is going to hire a firm and they're going to pay that firm $50,000 for them to comb through all of your P&Ls and your historical records. And they're very likely going to find something that you are either intentionally or unintentionally hiding from them. And what that means is that trust is going to start deteriorating in the relationship, and they're not going to be willing to spend as much on the business as they were before. So, how do you mitigate that? It is through communication. So very early on in the conversation, before you ever sign an LOI, have two conversations with the buyer. The first conversation is, here are all of the risks that I see in my business. Here is anything funky that you might find in my financials. Believe me, like buyers who work with founder-owned or family-owned businesses, they see funky things in financials all the time. So there's no reason to be embarrassed by anything that you've done. It's about being open in that communication so that they know what to expect and why it's there. And the second conversation that's really important to have is after you've expressed, here are all of the risks that you're going to find in my business. Once they have submitted an LOI to you that has a valuation and a structure on it, it's very important to say, how confident are you that you're going to come through with this valuation when we get to the closing table and this structure? And ask them for their track record. How many times have you retraded, and what were the circumstances around those retrades? Because that's the last thing that you want to do after either you or they or both have spent $100,000 or $200,000 going through due diligence, is that all of a sudden your purchase price is lower than it was before. And so make sure that you're having those conversations to avoid those pitfalls. And there's some other things that I don't want to go like too deep into the nitty gritty, but there are other terms that you should familiarize yourself in how they work. One is a working capital peg, and that goes through the amount of cash or working capital is in the business, and basically it just means like as the seller, you can't go collect all of your accounts receivables and take all of the cash out of the business and leave nothing from an operating standpoint at the sale. And sometimes sellers are calculating how much cash they have in the business and how much AR they can collect and adding that to the purchase price and saying, yeah, I'm willing to sell for that amount. But then when they find out that that's not the case, that it's really just the purchase price, that changes things. And when that conversation happens 2 months into diligence, it can really throw things off. So make sure that you're familiar with some of those terms and how the math works. It's simple math. If you're a business owner, you'll be able to understand the math. It's just recognizing that is something that's going to come up through the process.
Yeah, I would suspect. So I've heard of numbers in the past, about 50% of deals that are getting ready to sell have some kind of discount in the pricing. In your experiences, what are the top 2 or 3 reasons that this may happen? One of them, I think you probably already mentioned, is they're intentionally or unintentionally disclosing data, right? Be upfront, right? What are some other reasons that might happen?
So customer concentration is a big reason for buyers to discount. I often hear buyers say, if the top 5 customers are, over 30% of the business, or if the top 1 customer is more than 10 to 15% of the business. And those are significant numbers for founder owners and family owned businesses that are often founded off of 1 customer. And then they gain a couple more, or maybe they have 3 customers that are 90% of their business, but they have 100 total customers. That is still considered customer concentration. And many buyers just simply won't buy that business, and others will discount. They'll say, this top customer is worth $1 million. We're going to assume we're only going to keep 30% of that, and we're going to value your business that way. Those are arbitrary numbers that I'm throwing out, but that to give you an example of how they can look at those discounts. Some other reasons is key person risk. If the business owner, say a CPA firm, that business owner is the CPA, they have all of the relationships with their clients. The buyer is going to assume that a lot of those clients are going to leave when the CPA leaves. And that's the same with maybe a salesperson in a manufacturing organization. Like if this person leaves, he takes all of his relationships with them. Typically, or they're just really hard to replace, right? So even if they had some type of a non-compete or something, a key person, general manager, salesperson, or some other person could be leaving where it would impact the business greatly, and it's really hard to recruit that person. And then especially, I would suspect if you're in a certain area where it's harder to recruit, if they're not going to move the physical practice, then that makes it even more
of a daunting task, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, 100%. And also, I have seen business owners come forward with, adjusted EBITDA numbers that assume that they're going to take all of these employees that they have that are currently making above market rate salaries and decrease those salaries to market rate. And then they want to be valued off of this, assumed adjusted EBITDA. But there isn't a buyer in the world who's going to say, I'm going to walk in on day one and reduce all of my key executive salaries in order to make this valuation worth it. So, being really reasonable in how you are estimating your future cash flows, because that's really, when we're talking about evaluation, that's really what we're talking about. How much money is this business going to make me as a buyer down the line? And if I can't execute on the assumptions that you're telling me, then those numbers are not accurate. So you'll definitely see a discount for that. You may also see a discount, believe it or not, if you had a sudden increase in sales. We see this all the time where business owners say, I've just had the best year of my life. Sales increased by 50% last year. Now is the time to sell. You're not going to get a full valuation from that, because buyers are going to look at it and say, is this sustainable? Is there a reason why they increased by 50%? And is it going to go back down next year? We saw that a lot with COVID, especially where, people stopped paying for, capital improvements. And then all of a sudden, businesses have these booming years because all of these capital improvements that were put on the back burner came through. But that's not going to be sustainable. And so a buyer's not going to buy at that level. And honestly, the bank isn't going to underwrite that level of growth either.
Yeah. Great points, Michelle. There's so much more that we can talk about with this topic. I hope that maybe you can come back on the show again and talk, because I know that this is going to be very interesting for our listeners here. It's great to hear it from your side of what you experience, what buyers are looking for, because that's who you represent, is the buyer. And, business owners and people that listen to this podcast, you need to really pay close attention to that. Reach out to Michelle and chat with her about what she does, because I think that can really create some insight. But we really appreciate you being here today and really sharing some of your information, and hope that you'd be happy to come back on at some point here in the future when she's not dancing around the country and competing on a regular basis. Everybody, she's going to come back in and share some of her very, very important insights also. So thanks again so much for being here. I hope everybody who's listening to this podcast enjoyed this episode of Finishing Touches. If you'd like more content, certainly you can check out our website at prometheuspartners.com. If you like our podcast, please have a review on there. Certainly we have latest tips and insights inside the website. We look forward to accompanying you on your journey to a successful business transition in the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much. That's a wrap on today's episode of Finishing Touches. For more information and guidance, head over to prometheuspartners.com. Your feedback means the world to us, so please take a moment and leave a review of the podcast. You can stay in the loop or ask me a question by connecting with me on LinkedIn, or visit our website and start a conversation with me. We look forward to accompanying you on your journey to a successful business transition in our next episode, and have a great week. Thank you so much.